In today's episode of No Overtime, we're going to be discussing Embiid and Kyrie's season-ending injuries, the crazy trade between the 49ers and the Commanders, and our predictions for the NL and AL MVPs in the MLB.
Welcome back to another episode of No Overtime. Today's episode will be a shorter one, but we will be covering recent news from the NBA, MLB, and NFL. I'm Jake Goodman along with Michael Cantilli.
And today we're going to start by talking about Kyrie Irving's season-ending ACL injury, which he suffered last night. So what do you think, how does this affect this Mavs team going forward?
Yeah, so, obviously the Mavericks traded away Luka, so now they were relying on the duo of Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, but now both of them are hurt. Kyrie now out for the season, and we don't know when Anthony Davis is eligible to come back. So what I think they're going to do is, if AD isn't 100% healthy, I think they're going to keep him out, because at this point, making the playoffs and going far is going to be hard. So I think they're maybe focused on a draft pick. We're going to have to see what they do here, because without Kyrie and Anthony Davis, their supporting cast really isn't that good.
No. Yeah, I think the Mavs season, even though they're in the play-in right now, I think their season's effectively over. Even if they somehow, remain in the play-in, they're not going to make the playoffs. I think the only thing you can kind of hope for is get a decent draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we learned that Joel Embiid is going to be out for the season because he's undergoing another knee surgery. How does the Sixers, they've had so many injuries, and obviously Paul George has not been playing the way he usually plays. How do you think this affects the Sixers team?
Yeah, so the 76ers, obviously at the start of the season, they were expected to be a very high seed in the East. Many people expected them to make the playoffs and make a really deep push, but at this point without Embiid and their current record, making the playoffs is completely off the table. Now they only have Maxey and Paul George, who just looks washed right now.
Yeah.
I think they're just gonna play out the season. I don't think they're gonna try to tank, but this is a really bad look for Embiid. He's obviously a hated player.
Yeah.
But with this injury and practically barely playing this season, I think there's a good chance we don't see him on the Sixers next season.
Yeah, I don't think this affects their record right now because he hasn't really played much this season, so I don't think it's really going to affect the team that much. But I think obviously it's a tough blow because he's still a good player. But
yeah, and you kind of also hope to see Tyrese Maxey develop a bit.
Yeah.
Some of the younger guys, their backup centers, and the Sixers' future, just other than Maxey, looks kind of bleak right now.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to talk about the MLB season is starting soon, so let's make some predictions for who we think is going to win the AL MVP and the NL MVP.
Yeah, so let's start off with the AL MVP. I have Bobby Witt Jr. Of the Kansas City Royals. He ended second last season in MVP voting behind Aaron Judge, but I think he's going to take his spot. Now Aaron Judge isn't going to bat behind Soto, meaning other teams are going to try to walk him more often, and I think his stats are going to be worse. He's going to have less RBIs. In Bobby Witt, he hit for 330 average last season and stole 30 bases, along with 32 home runs. So he's got a chance to make the 40-40 club, which I think would make him the MVP.
Yeah.
And moving on to my National League MVP, I think Soto gets his first one. He's now on the Mets. He's going to be batting behind Lindor, so he's going to be seeing more pitches than he ever has, and this is only going to help his stats. I think he's going to have a ton of RBIs, a ton of home runs, and I think the Mets are going to be really good this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. But for my AL MVP, I'm going to go with Yordan Alvarez. I think, Judge, he's coming off a really rough World Series. I think that might play a factor that might get in his head a little bit. I think he's going to have, I'd say an off year or maybe a down year.
Mm-hmm.
And Jordan's coming off a big improvement year. He improved a lot from 2023 to 2024. He had 35 home runs, and he's batting just over 300. So I think he has a good chance to win MVP. And then in the National League, I got Shohei Ohtani. I feel like he's kind of the basic pick, but he's coming off a great season. I think he's also going to be pitching too, so he's going to add a lot to his resume for the MVP.
And as for teams in the MLB, are there any teams that you think are going to win the World Series, or any like underrated teams that you just like?
Well, for the World Series, and I know it's like a basic pick, but like the Dodgers, like they
Mhm.
just keep adding like more and more pieces, and I
Yeah.
think I don't really see a team like stopping them. Like they like steamrolled like the entire like MLB in the playoffs
Yeah.
last year, and they killed the Yankees. And
Yeah. For me in the National League, there's really only three teams I like. It would probably be the Mets, the Dodgers, and the Braves. I think the Padres could be sneaky, but I wouldn't count out the Braves to maybe make it past the Dodgers. And in the NL, I think, I think the Orioles, they have a really young team, and I wouldn't be surprised if like Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman like lead them to that World Series spot. They've been in the playoffs for a couple of years now. They used to be bad, but they're developing chemistry and they're starting to look really good.
yeah. And now finally, we're gonna talk about the Debo Samuel trade. So Debo was traded to the Commanders for just a 5th-round pick, and even though Debo is coming off an off year, he still is. He's still like one of the best receivers on the 49ers. Maybe not last year, but
Mhm.
the years prior. Like we know what he's capable of. We know like what a good like receiver he is, and like how versatile he is. So what do you think? How does
He's 29 years old, and at 29 years old, as a receiver in the NFL, I think he's starting to go out of his prime now. Last season, he only had 670 yards and 3 touchdowns, and for the wide receiver one with Brandon Ayuk out, those stats are just terrible. So part of the 49ers having a bad season was, the Christian McCaffrey injury, but the fact he wasn't able to step up, and even when he played in that running back role for a bit, he wasn't effective at all. So I think a 5th-round pick at first on paper, it seems like nothing, but I don't know how much Deebo Samuel really has left in him.
Yeah, and I think even though he's 29, he's like you said, he's starting to come out of his prime. I still think he has a few good years left in him.
Mhm.
I think it was a steal for the Commanders to only give up a 5th-round pick for him. I think he's gonna have a good season this year. Like just a change of pace with Jaden Daniels. And I think he's gonna have one more good season before he starts to decline.
Yeah, I think he's going to be really interesting on the Commanders because last year we saw they went to the NFC Championship with just really Terry McLaurin. I think adding that second receiver I think they're going to do design plays for Debo, maybe out of the backfield. And really, even though he maybe wasn't great last year, adding him for only a 5th-round pick, I don't think it could do much harm here. I think this will only help them. And, the Commanders with Jaden Daniels, how he played, they look really scary.
Yeah. So that's all on today's show. Thanks for tuning in, and be on the lookout for new episodes.